To keep things moving, let's turn to our final presentation, Resilience. 20 minutes, and we should have a few extra minutes for general questions.
Thanks, Jeremy. This is Britt Wandick with Resilient Networks. And I'd like to first start off by saying thank you to Jeremy Grant, as well as the MPO and then the members of the IDSG for joining us this afternoon. We do have the dubious honor of having the last presentation, so those that have stuck with it all the way through, thankful for that. We moving along to what we're actually doing in the pilots themselves. This is just a quick review. Resilient actually has two pilots themselves that we're covering, one in the education space and one in the healthcare space. You can see on the slide here as well that we've brought in numerous partners to be able to support us in that, and we had a common infrastructure that we hope to deploy to essentially allow information exchange to occur in each of those verticals. So in order to be able to achieve that, we needed to blend together the services and capabilities that would come out of, say, a Mirth or a Medicity with the identity capabilities and attribute capabilities that we were able to achieve from LexisNexis and the American Medical Association, and then provide those back to physicians, in the case of healthcare, through the San Diego Health Connect and through Gorge Health Connect. Similarly, in the education space, right, we were able to bring together several of the school districts in California and provide an information sharing capability between parents and children's records, and in one case, actual corporate learning material and corporate participants, employees, through the use of student information systems, the same level of identity capabilities, and we're looking to move that over to, through our efforts with Warner Brothers and Newstar, into multitude of online media capability for both corporate America as well as for the education space. I realize many of you have seen this before, but just a quick recap on what we set out to do. We are moving into the operational phase on our pilots, but before we move to that, just a quick note on what a trust network is and why it's important for solving some of the challenges that exist around each of the pilots that we're entering into. So when you boil it all down, it becomes relatively simple that a trust network essentially is a set of peer-to-peer software that we've deployed with each of those partners, and it enables them to make what we would call context-aware decisions. So not only who is it that's an individual that's at the glass from an authentication perspective, but also looking at the authorization associated with them, essentially what is it that they're allowed to do. And then the third piece that we're able to bring to bear is the context, essentially, of that trust relationship. What are the policies that need to be met, whether that's COPPA and FERPA, or whether it's specific to HIPAA or HITECH Act in the Health Information Exchange. We recognize that in many cases, simply authenticating or simply authorizing an individual isn't sufficient to be able to meet all the necessary needs of a trusted information exchange. And what the peer-to-peer software allows you to do essentially is to extract that from the actual applications and services that exist and move it up to the network level. That's a trust network. And when you do that, you're able to then bring together a set of syndicated data, syndicated services. In the case of the two pilots, we show that for access to records, essentially, whether that's educational records or for health records in the case of the ZIP or the PCC pilot. And we still maintain the necessary controls through resilient verification of facts. We provide privacy-enhancing capabilities with regard to authentication and attribute verification. And ultimately, we strive to provide some level of automated compliance, right? So you can actually go back and ensure that you met the necessary necessary policies, all while maintaining a relatively easy-to-use administrative user interface and hopefully adding convenience for the user as well so that you can drive adoption. So where are we with these pilots today? Well, effectively in the healthcare space, right, we are live. We have doctors that are actually exchanging some of the health information via an e-referral. You'll see a demonstration of that later today in a video. We're doing that between Gorge Health Connect and San Diego Health Connect, and we're using 4 of our attribute services to be able to achieve that. AMA is providing verification associated with doctors themselves. LexisNexis is supporting us through their knowledge-based authentication, as well as for being able to provide authentication of an individual through that service. And then we have the actual directories that are homed at the Health Connect organizations themselves that allow us to do verification of business associates and also make sure that we have the correct information regarding the physicians themselves. We've entered into an agreement with Authentify to support our multi-factor authentication to provide an alternative path for how we actually authenticate the physician. And then, as Aaron mentioned earlier, we've engaged on a trust framework effort specific to PCC to ensure that we meet the necessary policies associated with that collaborative exchange. We'll hear a little bit more about that from Aaron in a few moments. Similarly, in the education pilot, we actually have 3 school districts that are actually engaging with us to use our APIs to connect their student information systems to a trust network and then exchange that data between students and parents in the schools. It hasn't been an easy road here. One, there's not a lot of budget associated with the educational systems when it comes to exposing this data. And so we needed to leverage some of the external capabilities that are outward-facing, such as Clever, or in the case of SunGuard, and use them as an actual foil against our capabilities to be able to expose that data in ways that haven't necessarily been thought of before, specifically to verify the parent and the child attribute to ensure that before a parent is able to access those records, we have some confidence in it. Additionally, what we're doing within the commercial space is providing access to online training. And in this case, for Accenture, they're able to access a online learning capability through Knowledge Factor, which isn't necessarily hosted within the Accenture VPN or inside their corporate enterprise. It's external. And these employees are able to get there from essentially any device, anywhere, while still meeting the necessary policies of both Accenture as well as adding convenience for the employees in the completion of their training activities. So we're beginning to launch in the January timeframe for the school districts themselves. Everyone's taking a little break over the holiday here, and we're coming into the new year ready to provide those services, and the Accenture efforts are up and running as we speak. So I mentioned earlier we're going to provide a demonstration. It's a short video of how the actual patient-centered coordination of care e-referral would work. These are the particulars around that. So we have both the State of Oregon and California Health Connect organizations, and from that we have specific physicians and their staff. You'll notice on the bottom as well here that we display a couple of services or several services that are provided for us, right? So we're using Medicity's iNext and MirthMail as an initial interface in order to be able to leverage the direct message capabilities, for which there's been quite a bit done already. And then we ourselves are blending that into the capabilities of either Gmail or Microsoft Exchange to be able to get a message to the physician themselves. And then the Trust Network is invoked as they try to come back and actually access the data. And at that point, we leverage the AMA and our verification services through LexisNexis, as well as the out-of-band authentication capabilities to ensure that the correct physician receives the correct data. So at this point, I will turn it over, and I recognize I'm going a little bit quicker than perhaps otherwise noted, just so we have some time for questions at the end. But if you would like to launch the demo, that would be great. Generating e-referral via the RF gateway to Dr. James Colleen's staff of San Diego Health Connect. You need a document. We'll browse for that. scan the e Well, thank you. So hopefully you had a little flavor there of what we're able to achieve with the PCC e-referral pilot. Hyperbole aside there, and we do think this is a significantly impactful change. And in fact, we've got some initial feedback from physicians stating that this will definitely help them meet their meaningful use criteria, as well as provide an easy way for them to reach doctors on a national scale. As mentioned earlier, there are opportunities in connecting with the other pilots that are providing similar types of Health Connect capabilities, such as those in Virginia, and we look forward to leveraging the PCC pilot as we move forward. We also have the second pilot, though, which is that of ZIPS for education, and in this case, you'll notice that we have a very similar set of actors and similar set of services. As we begin this pilot here in the January timeframe, we'll be performing a similar type of demonstration video, and we hope that perhaps by the next plenary session in Atlanta, we'll have a similar review that we can provide to you, the IDSG, at that time. I'm now going to move on to do a little bit of discussion about the trust framework that we've been performing. Obviously, being able to meet the necessary policies that you saw in the video didn't come just necessarily out of thin air. We had to actually put some thought work to it. We've been supported in that effort through our pilot partners, essentially 24 participants. They were all independent healthcare experts. They understand the landscape significantly. And we progressed through essentially 11 working group sessions to be able to understand what those policies need to be, what the regulations would be associated with it, and to draft an initial document that supported the implementation that we performed within the pilots themselves. At this point, I'd like to introduce Aaron Seib as well. He's been greatly helpful in supporting that Trust Framework working group, and he'll provide some additional context of where it is today and also where it needs to go in the future. I'd like to turn it over to Aaron at this time for a few comments.
Sure, Britt. Thanks so much. So, just to quickly introduce myself, Aaron Seib, been working in HIE for a long time. Listened carefully to Jeremy's introduction, and I found it really interesting. One of the things that we discovered during this process, and I think most folks who could pay attention to that or who watched the demonstration that Britt showed, much of the value add that we see in health information exchange over and beyond the must-have of identity management is related to policy management. And for this particular pilot, we were very careful to scope a very specific set of transactions. It was a great deal of our time was spent trying to figure out if we had this attribute or this series of attributes, here's the other thing that we could do, or here's the other use case that we could satisfy. But much of what we could do was constrained today. So, I want to try and test the theory of what is the demand, what are the relying parties out there looking for. If it's just ID management that we're providing, that's only part of the question that I think folks like myself in the states that are members of our association are really struggling with and hoping to get from, projects like participating in this NSTIC activity. We saw a lot of value in what we were doing here in the sense that much of the exchange and the use case that we were developing towards was for populations that don't typically interact with some of the existing tools that are in place. So I'm really very interested in those kinds of efforts that are going on as demonstrated in the other pilots and in this pilot to explore uses of alternative methods of identity verification, including facial identity and so forth as a very significant value add in the healthcare space. We've continued to work on healthcare for 5 years, but many of the things that are really the highest value have not changed, and we really need to investigate some of these alternatives. So I'm interested in understanding what the perception of this group is as far as relying parties being ready to adopt, and what do we need to do to help you sort of change that story in the national conversation. Back to you, Britt.
Great. So I think we're actually getting close on our time here, but we're moving into some deeper meat of the matter. Thank you very much, Aaron, for those words and for the significant effort that you've contributed on the Trust Framework Working Group. We do look forward to continuing to press forward with the items you mentioned, and also taking these lessons learned and coupling them together. So clearly, as we move forward in our little over a year's worth of work on the pilots here, hasn't all been roses. There are challenges that we've experienced along the way, especially when you bring together this many partners. In healthcare in particular, right, in some of the instances we were trying to provide clinical decision support along with the actual transfer of the e-referral, but revenue, business drivers actually dictated that the ecosystem participation in the pilot would trump that, right? And they also not only trump that, but they also trump both privacy and security concerns, right? There's a true commercial need that need to be dealt with here, and so being able to find that balance between privacy support, security support, and actual business drivers is something that we continually need to navigate both in the pilot and in our efforts to commercialize these efforts beyond the NSTIC itself. In addition, there's some existing methods today that doctors find convenient. They may not be the most effective necessarily, but they are entrenched. They're comfortable with it. It doesn't take them out of that comfort zone, and it's something that they're familiar with or that their business staff and associates are familiar with. So breaking down those models themselves, breaking down the model for health information exchange is something that needs to be changed in order to be able to adopt a technology like that. Additionally, there are a few externalized web services. The actual gateway that you saw utilized in the demonstration is something that we, Resilient, and our partners came up with to be able to provide and expose that service for the particular pilot itself. But there are a few externalized web services that exist today. It's a growing number. It's highly fragmented, but many of them are still built on kind of a hub and spoke model and focused internally for a specific sector or a specific group of people. And then lastly, when we get into the actual discussion of privacy, obviously there's been quite a bit of work that's been done around patients themselves, but the IT users, the actual physicians and the staff, as you saw, we actually demonstrated the knowledge-based authentication. There are gaps. There are significant gaps for those IT users that need to be addressed as well, and they're much a part of the privacy implications of any solution as the actual patients are. And that's an area that needs to be addressed as we go forward. So what we focused on essentially is a common set of solutions, right? Being able to provide an interoperable and adaptable infrastructure, not only for that of e-referrals, but all information exchange in the healthcare market to be able to support meaningful use. And we're also looking to make sure we provide a minimal impact as a way of driving adoption through convenience for existing physicians, existing staff members, and ultimately patients in the field so that we can rapidly deploy this type of technology. When you look at education, we have similar types of challenges. It's slightly different, though, in the fact that access to a student's record is actually it's pretty common already, and parents are relatively comfortable with the way that it exists, but it's also very focused within and very siloed within the school districts. The school districts themselves have a very limited budget when it comes to information technology, and in many cases they're short-staffed. So any attempt to change that or move it to a national scale has a natural recalcitrance that exists simply because they don't have the sufficient resources to do it. There's also a bit of a perception that needs to be overcome. As one person at a senior level, a superintendent, put it, what's the worst that can come if somebody hacks into my online learning course? They learn a little math. And so in that instance, providing additional levels of control or additional levels of verification aren't always at the forefront of an individual or at the school district's top of mind, if you will, and priorities that they're trying to lay down from an educational or from an information technology perspective. That
Hi, Britt, this is Laura.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to give you the time's up message.
Okay.
So if you could wrap up real quick and we can move on to questions just regarding yours, and then we can move on to general questions as well.
No worries. Everyone can read the slide just as well as I can. So love to answer some questions if there are any.
Yeah, we can leave the slide up for a little bit so people can read it.
Great, great.
All right, I also want to have a little time once we have questions here from sort of general questions. There's already a couple that have started to trickle in that I'll keep in the queue. But before we jump to sort of general discussion, are there any specific questions for Britt at Resilient? Don't be shy now, folks.
One of these days, Jeremy, I'm going to have to actually go first.
The whole alphabetical thing.
Yeah, I know. I don't mind being last. But.
It has been a long time. Well, let me tell you what. If folks have specific resilient questions, we can tackle them in the next 15 minutes. But we had a couple questions, actually, pretty similar themes. One from Tom J. and one from John Morkey that talked about. Tom said that the presentations emphasized the challenge of getting reliant parties involved, and separately, John's asked. With the pilots, how do you get over some of the reliant party hesitancy? Also ask, what's working, what's broken, how are policy choices impacting things? Can all 5 of the presenters unmute and sort of, jump in and talk about some of these things? I'd actually love to get, some more specific feedback on some of the reliant party issues that we're dealing with, since it really is so key to the ecosystem.